Well, today, President Trump changed the battlefield again. South Carolina's Governor Henry McMaster has now officially appointed Lindsey Graham's sister, Darlene Graham Nordone, to fill Lindsey's vacant Senate seat. And this is the person President Trump publicly recommended. So this is no longer a story about what Trump might do next, folks. He made the recommendation and the governor acted, and Trump got his pick. And I think the most important part about this appointment is not simply that Lindsey Graham's sister is going to the U.S. Senate. The most important part is that she's going there temporarily because President Trump didn't use this moment to crown the next permanent senator from South Carolina. I think he did this to help build a bridge, a caretaker, somebody who can restore the Republican vote in the Senate, honor Lindsey Graham's family, and keep the permanent succession battle completely open. And I think this is a much smarter political move than immediately handing the seat to one of the ambitious Republicans that have been circling the White House. So I want to talk about what's happened, okay? After Lindsey Graham's sudden passing, South Carolina law gave Governor Henry McMaster the authority to appoint somebody to serve temporarily. President Trump then publicly recommended Darlene Graham. And actually, he went on Meet the Press and he was asked about it. And he said that he had somebody in mind, but he wasn't going to say anything. But this morning, he made the recommendation. And Trump called her a great choice and said appointing her would be a tribute to Lindsey, who helped raise her after their parents died. And Governor McMaster pretty much followed through right away and made the recommendation. So Nordone is now going to serve through the remainder of Lindsey Graham's current term, which expires in January. Meanwhile, South Carolina, they're going to hold an accelerated election to determine who gets the seat for the long term. And with his appointment, Nordone becomes the first woman ever to represent South Carolina in the U.S. Senate. I hate identity politics, but I thought I'd say it. So that's the headline. But here's the strategy underneath this. Trump got the Republican vote restored without giving one permanent candidate an enormous advantage in a full-on election because they would be the incumbent. And that matters. Because the moment Governor McMaster appoints a sitting congressman, statewide official, or maybe a career politician, well, that person becomes the incumbent senator. They receive the title, the office, the staff, the TV exposure, the donor calls, the fundraising list, the relationships, all the other stuff that Republican candidates get right away. Okay. And that would leave any competition starting from behind. But that's not what happened. So McMaster appointing somebody else, well, their immediate role is really this person can take the immediate role of stabilizing the seat. And that keeps this competitive. Nobody's been crowned. So, look, nobody's going to get to walk into this upcoming primary and say, hey, I'm the senator. I got the perks, leverage the perks, and get an unfair advantage. They still have to campaign. They have to explain what they believe. They have to prove that they support the president's agenda, and they have to earn the votes of the people of South Carolina. And that's the first major consequence. So the appointment restores the Senate, okay, without deciding the future of the seat. And that preserves President Trump's leverage here because he's not spent his permanent endorsement yet. So if you think about it, if Trump had pushed Nancy Mace or Ralph Norman or Pam Evette or Russell Fry or maybe another established Republican to receive the appointment, he would have effectively put his thumb on the scale before the race even began. He would have elevated one person, and he would have become politically attached to that person right away. So instead, he backed someone temporarily. Now he can watch the field develop. He can watch who enters. He can watch who raises money. He can watch who connects to the voters. And he can watch who supports the Save America Act. He can watch who helps him move judges, nominees, legislation. And he can watch which candidates suddenly discover loyalty when President Trump's only after a Senate. He can And he can watch which candidates suddenly discover loyalty to President Trump only after a Senate seat becomes available. And this is valuable information, quite frankly. I mean, he has the ability to wait. He can make these candidates compete and he can let them expose themselves. Then, when the endorsement has maximum value, he can step in. And that's the second consequence. This appointment buys Trump time. And that's another example of leverage. Another practical advantage that almost nobody's talking about. The appointment protects the Republican majority because people aren't going to be leaving the House. Several of the Republican names being discussed for the seat are currently members of the House of Representatives. So Republicans don't have to worry about replacing those seats unless they go through the process, which would give the party time. So if McMaster had appointed sitting Republican, well, that seat probably would have been vacant while they campaigned. And then, look, Republicans would have to have another special election. So, I mean, that would mean Trump would gain one senator while losing his already narrow House. So why create a second vacancy? Why solve the Senate problem by creating one in the House? Look, appointing Darlene Graham Nordone, Trump and the governor filled the vacancy without impacting the public, or impacting the party holistically. And I think that was very clean. No vacancy. No temporary reduction, no special election, no second special election needed. So that's the third consequence, right? This move stabilized the Senate without destabilizing the House. Now Republicans can return to a 53-47 Senate majority, and that matters right away. The Senate has nominations to process. Defense legislation, national security, government funding, potential Russia sanctions, election integrity, Save America Act. Every Republican vote matters. And like I've told you, especially with Mitch McConnell out recovering from his illness. So this isn't some symbolic appointment, folks. Nope, it's not. It's not where the Senate can wait several months to sort things out in South Carolina. President Trump needs that vote, and he needs it now. And the governor of South Carolina, McMaster, restored it. And he restored it through using the person that President Trump requested and trusts. That sends another message. It tells Republican governors, that senators and members of Congress, that Trump is not merely commenting from the sidelines. He's shaping the playing field. So, but look, be honest, that appointment belonged to the governor. He made the legal decision. I mean, Darlene Nordone is not simply a Trump employee being placed in office by presidential order. That's not how it works. But when president publicly recommends someone by name and the governor appoints them almost immediately, well, Trump's preference mattered. And McMaster had every reason to understand the consequences of ignoring it. South Carolina is one of President Trump's strongest states, and Republican voters listen to him. So candidates seeking the seat or want his endorsement, the governor knows that. Everybody involved knows it. So McMaster's his appointment doesn't just fill the vacancy. It shows that Trump is already the central figure in the fight over what's coming next. That doesn't mean he picked a permanent winner. It just means he's preserved the seat, the ability for it to be chosen through the will of the people, through a competitive race. That's a really strong position. So just talk about Darlene Graham Nordone for a second. I mean, she was deeply connected to Lindsey Graham, from what I understand. Their parents passed away, and Lindsey ended up raising her. And she was with them publicly. She supported his career. And by all accounts, they had a pretty close relationship. So I think there's a legitimate human story here. It is about a tribute. It allows Lindsey Graham's family to participate directly in completing his final term. It places somebody who understood him personally into the seat that he held for more than 2 decades. And it gives the state moment of continuity after such a sudden loss. And that part shouldn't be dismissed. Respect for the family and their story, doesn't mean that we ignore them or ignore the political effect. And both of these things can be true. It can be meaningful. It can be a tribute, but it also can be a very practical political arrangement. In fact, that's probably why it works so well. It satisfies the emotional moment without locking Republicans into some permanent decision. It honors Lindsey without allowing Washington insiders to quietly choose his successor. And it gives South Carolina voters a real election instead of a coronation. That's why the word temporary matters so much. He's not automatically being handed the future. He's going to be caretaking. So now the permanent race begins. South Carolina Republicans are scheduled to hold a special primary election this August. And if no candidate wins outright, there will be a runoff. Then the general election will take place in November. And that is a compressed political calendar. Candidates have very little time to organize, very little time to raise money, and very little time to build statewide operations. And very little time to convince President Trump that they deserve his support. That means the next several weeks are going to come and go really quick. You got Nancy Mace, Ralph Norman, Pamela Evette, Russell Fry, and maybe some other candidates that jump in. And every single one of them now face the same question. Why you? Why should the people of South Carolina choose you? Why should President Trump choose you? What are you bringing to the table? You going to support the agenda? Save America Act? The nominees? You going to fight when the Senate leadership prima donnas start playing their games? Or will you, forget that you campaigned as a Republican when the cameras are off? That's the audition. It's exactly what it means. That's exactly what I meant yesterday when I said that Lindsey Graham's death changed the Senate battlefield. The vacancy didn't merely change the vote count. It created an opening for a much larger fight over the direction of the party. And Lindsey Graham was one of the, like him or not, one of the most influential foreign policy voices in the Senate. Close to Trump. Not always aligned with him, but, he was close to him. He had pretty deep relationships in the defense establishment, seniority, had committee influence, donors, staff, decades of institutional power. So the person that replaces him will inherit a lot of responsibility. So that's it, folks. Pretty, one of those days. Hey, at least President Trump made sure that the people of South Carolina get to choose. That's beauty in itself. So we'll see you, folks. See how it works out. Keep your eyes on the ball. Talk to you later.